Every single Thanksgiving, my parents would brag about my sister and her corporate deals. Then they would turn their condescending gaze to me and ask if I was still just teaching. At my father's lavish retirement party, he took a microphone in front of 100 of Atlanta's most elite guests and called me a supporter, not a leader. He actually used the word peasant. But the real show started when my quiet husband walked up to that very same stage, looked my father dead in the eye, and slowly asked, "Do you even know who your daughter is?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who constantly underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the invisible daughter in a family obsessed with the illusion of Black excellence. My father, Reginald, built a massive logistics empire from the ground up. He is an Omega sci-fi legacy, a man whose entire identity revolves around status, wealth, and securing his seat at the most exclusive Jack and Jill galas. We were at the St. Regis in Atlanta for his grand retirement dinner. The ballroom was dripping in crystal chandeliers and heavy gold accents packed with 100 of the city's most influential doctors, judges, and high society elites. I was sitting at a small table in the far back corner near the swinging kitchen doors, next to my husband, Marcus. My father tapped his crystal champagne glass, signaling for silence. The room quieted down as he adjusted his custom-tailored tuxedo and beamed at my older sister, Chloe, who was sitting at the primary VIP table right next to the stage. "Chloe," he announced, his voice booming through the expensive speakers, "you are the future of this family. You are the very definition of Black excellence, and I am leaving my legacy in your highly capable hands." The crowd erupted into loud applause. Chloe smiled perfectly, adjusting her massive diamond necklace. But my father was not finished. He let the applause die down before his eyes scanned the room and locked directly onto my table in the dark corner. "And then there is Maya," he said, leaning heavily into the microphone. A collective hush fell over the room. We all know every kingdom needs its peasants, right? We cannot all be chief executive officers. Someone has to be a supporter instead of a leader. Someone has to teach the kids in the public schools. Laughter rippled through the elegant room. 100 people dripping in designer clothes, chuckling at the failure daughter who went to a state college instead of Spelman, like all the other women in our family lineage. Beside me, Marcus went completely rigid. He is a quiet man who rarely speaks out of turn, but I saw his jaw clench so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. His large hand gripped his water glass, and his knuckles turned stark white under the dim ballroom lighting. He started to push his heavy chair back, ready to stand up and defend my honor. I placed my hand gently over his. "Stand down, Marcus," I whispered, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my face completely devoid of emotion. Let them have their moment. But the humiliation was not over. As my father stepped off the stage to mingle, a tall shadow fell across our small table. It was Preston, my sister Chloe's husband. Preston was a white corporate finance guy who somehow managed to be more elitist and arrogant than my entire family combined. He carried himself with this unbearable smugness because my father treated him like the golden son he never had. Preston dropped a black leather checkbook directly onto my dinner plate, deliberately splashing a few drops of red wine onto my silk dress. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space with a mocking grin. "Chloe told me to bring this to you," Preston said loudly enough for the neighboring tables to turn and stare. "Your parents are not covering the plates for non-contributing family members tonight. Your portion comes to $800. Cash or card, Maya?" He let out a condescending chuckle before looking at Marcus. "Actually, maybe we can set up a payment plan for you two. I know a public school teacher salary and an IT help desk wage will not stretch far enough for a St. Regis dinner. Do not worry, Marcus. We will not tell anyone Reginald had to buy that suit for you just so you could get past the front door man." Preston stood there waiting for me to break. He expected me to cry or beg or run out of the service elevator in shame like I had done so many times in my youth when the crushing weight of their expectations suffocated me. He expected me to be the weak little girl who was constantly reminded she was not smart enough or rich enough to sit at the main table with the rest of the elite. But I was not that girl anymore. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I slowly reached into my velvet clutch and deliberately bypassed my standard debit cards. I pulled out a heavy, solid titanium American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card that is strictly by invitation only for the ultra-wealthy. I tossed it onto the silver tray where it landed with a heavy, unmistakable metallic clank that made Preston physically blink in confusion. "Run that, Preston," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "Pay for our plates. In fact, why do not you go ahead and pay for your own table, too? Keep the change. You look like you are struggling lately." Preston stared at the titanium card, his smug smile slowly sliding off his face. His eyes darted from the card to my face, trying to compute how the family disappointment was casually tossing around a card with absolutely no credit limit. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The superiority complex that usually radiated from him was instantly replaced by sheer panic. He knew exactly what that card meant, and he knew I did not get it from teaching elementary school math. But before he could even process the reality of the situation, the sharp clicking of designer heels echoed on the marble floor approaching our table. The heavy leather checkbook slapped against my bone china dinner plate with a sharp, aggressive thud. Deep burgundy wine splashed directly onto the lap of my cream silk dress. I did not gasp. I did not jump up or frantically dab at the stain. I simply sat there and watched the dark liquid pool against the fabric, then slowly lifted my gaze to the man leaning over our small table. Preston wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, a piece of clothing I knew for a fact was charged to my father's corporate account. His smug face was flushed with the arrogance of a man handed the keys to an empire he did not build. He planted both palms flat on our table, projecting his voice loud enough to halt the conversations at the neighboring tables. The clinking of silver forks came to a dead stop. "Chloe told me to bring this to you," Preston announced, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Your parents have a strict policy for tonight. They are not covering the cost of plates for non-contributing family members. The total comes to exactly $1,600 for the two of you. Will you be using cash or card, Maya?" I stared at him, my expression perfectly blank. I could feel the burning stares of Atlanta's most elite circles practically searing the back of my neck. These people measured your worth by your pedigree, by whether you crossed the stage at Spelman, and by what Greek letters you wore. My father had spent his life cultivating their approval, and now he sent his white son-in-law to execute my public humiliation. Preston chuckled when I did not reach for my purse. Actually, he continued raising his voice so the distinguished guests nearby could hear every humiliating syllable. "Maybe we can set up a payment plan for you two. I know a public school teacher's salary and an IT help desk wage will not cover a dinner at the St. Regis. We all respect your charity work with those inner-city kids, but realism is important. You simply do not belong in rooms like this." He was weaponizing my passion against me, using the career I loved to strip away my dignity. He expected me to shrink, to lower my head in shame because I did not fit my mother's flawless high society mold. Then Preston made his mistake. He turned his attention away from me and looked down at my husband. Marcus sat perfectly still. He is a tall man who commands a room by existing, yet he always remained quietly in the background during these gatherings to keep the peace. Preston, completely blind to the silent, dangerous shift in Marcus's posture, leaned in closer. "Do not worry," Marcus Preston mocked, patting my husband's shoulder in a gesture so deeply patronizing it made my blood boil. "We will not tell anyone that Reginald had to take you shopping this morning. We all remember that shiny off-the-rack polyester disaster you wore to Thanksgiving last year. Reginald said he had to buy you that tailored suit you are wearing right now just so you would not embarrass the family at the valet stand tonight. It is okay, buddy. We know you are doing your best with what little you have." The lie was so blatant, so uniquely designed to castrate Marcus in front of the black elite, that it hung in the humid ballroom air like toxic gas. My father had not bought Marcus anything. My father did not even know Marcus's clothing size. But Preston needed the narrative. He needed to be the savior, the brilliant financial mastermind, while reducing the strong black man sitting next to me to a charity case who needed his father-in-law to dress him. Under the table, I placed my hand gently on Marcus's thigh. His muscles were corded tight, coiled like a predator preparing to strike. But Marcus did not shout. He did not throw a punch. He slowly turned his head to look at Preston, and a chilling, razor-sharp smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man looking at a ghost. Preston faltered for a fraction of a second, his smug grin wavering as he met Marcus's dead, calm eyes. He expected outrage. He expected an explosive reaction that would give hotel security a reason to drag us out through the service elevator, cementing our status as the family embarrassments. The utter silence from our side of the table clearly unnerved him. I kept my hand on Marcus's leg, grounding him, letting him know exactly what play we were running. I looked at the dark wine stain on my dress, then back to the leather checkbook sitting next to my plate. This was the moment they had orchestrated for months, a calculated public severing of the bloodline. They wanted me to feel the full weight of my supposed inferiority. They wanted me to break. I slowly reached for my evening clutch, preparing to deliver the first dose of reality this family had seen in decades. Before my fingers could even graze the clasp of my purse, a sharp, rhythmic sound echoed over the quiet murmurs of the ballroom. Click, click, click. The sharp sound amplified. It was the unmistakable heavy strike of Christian Louboutin heels, marching aggressively across the marble floor. The sound cut through the tension, like a knife drawing every eye in the room. I did not even have to turn my head to know who was coming. Chloe had arrived to finish the job, and she was not alone. The heavy scent of expensive Chanel perfume hit my senses a second before my mother, Jacqueline, stepped out from the shadows flanking my sister like a general preparing for war. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a unified front of absolute disdain, ready to ensure that my humiliation was absolute and final. The real execution was about to begin. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her perfectly manicured hands clenching into tight fists at her sides. Her breathing was heavy, her chest rising and falling rapidly under her custom evening gown as she took in the sight of the heavy titanium American Express Centurion card resting carelessly on the silver tray. For a second, her pristine mask slipped, revealing a flash of absolute bewilderment, before her face contorted back into a mask of pure, towering rage. The low, tilted angle of the room seemed to shrink around her, making her look frantic while I sat completely still on the velvet sofa. I maintained total composure, my spine perfectly straight, my hands folded loosely in my lap as I watched my older sister unravel in real time. Chloe did not wait for an explanation. She snatched the leather checkbook from Preston's hand with a violent yank, nearly knocking a crystal water glass off the table. She didn't look at the black card. She refused to acknowledge it. Instead, she turned her fury directly toward Marcus, shoving the leather folder hard into his chest. "Pick it up," she ordered, her voice cutting through the soft jazz music playing in the background like a buzzsaw. "Pick it up and pay the bill right now. Did you really think you could sit back here in the dark and pretend you are part of this family? Did you think a heavy piece of metal would change what you actually are? You are an assistant at a help desk, Marcus. You do not belong here." Marcus caught the checkbook effortlessly with one hand, his face completely unbothered. He didn't blink. He didn't stand up. He just looked at Chloe with a cool, detached curiosity that only seemed to drive her deeper into madness. Chloe turned her venomous gaze back to me, her eyes scanning my silk dress with undisguised disgust. "Look at you," she hissed loudly, ensuring the nearby tables of judges and doctors could hear every word. "You sit there acting like you are unbothered, but we all know the truth, Maya. You are the definitive failure of this bloodline. When you rejected Spelman College to go to a cheap state school, you drew a line in the sand. You chose mediocrity. Every single woman in our family has legacy. We have standards. We wear the pink and green with pride." She stepped closer, leaning over the table, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of anger and desperation. You are an absolute embarrassment to our Alpha Kappa Alpha legacy. Mom has to make up excuses every time her line sisters ask what her youngest daughter is doing with her life. What is she supposed to say? Oh, Maya is just grading papers in an underfunded public school. Maya is married to a man who handles password resets for a living. You brought a peasant mindset into a house built on black excellence. You thought you were proving a point by being independent, but all you did was prove that you did not have what it takes to lead. The surrounding guests were openly staring now, their hushed whispers filling the gaps between Chloe's frantic breathing. Preston stood right behind her, his confidence returning as he crossed his arms and nodded along with his wife's tirade. Chloe smiled wickedly, sensing she had the audience she always craved. She threw her head back, tapping her fingers against her designer clutch. But you want to know what real leadership looks like, Maya? She bragged, her voice dripping with unearned superiority. Real leadership is what Preston just did for this family. While you were busy playing savior to children who will never achieve anything, my husband was out in the real world saving our father's legacy. Preston just orchestrated a multi-million-dollar buyout with Apex Partners. He saved the family logistics empire. When Dad announces the acquisition tonight, Preston and I will be cemented as the absolute saviors of everything Reginald built. We are the future. You are just a guest we reluctantly allowed through the door because Mom didn't want the society pages wondering why you were missing. I stayed silent, letting her words echo across the grand ballroom. I didn't defend my state school education. I didn't explain that the state school she mocked had one of the most advanced technology and engineering programs in the country. I didn't tell her that while she was busy networking at cocktail parties, I was quietly building something monumental. I just raised my glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip of water. I looked at Chloe, then at Preston, and let a small, sharp smirk play at the corner of my lips. My total lack of a reaction was a weapon. It was driving them crazy because they wanted a screaming match. They wanted me to act out so they could justify their hatred. Marcus reached over, placing his hand over mine, his touch warm and steady. He adjusted his silver cuffs, looking up at Preston and Chloe with that same dangerous, unbothered smile. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red at our shared silence. "You think you can just sit there and look down on us?" she screamed, her voice finally cracking under the weight of her own rage. "You have nothing. This table is where you belong, in the back, in the dark. Preston is a partner at a top firm. He commands millions. What do you have, Marcus? A computer monitor and a headset. You are a nobody." Just as Chloe prepared to launch into another insult, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over our section of the ballroom. The air grew cold. The guests who had been whispering suddenly snapped their mouths shut and looked toward the main aisle. A shadow moved into the light. The heavy clicking of heels stopped. My mother, Jacqueline, stepped forward. At 60 years old, she was the epitome of cold calculation. Her silver hair was styled flawlessly, her posture rigid and unyielding as she stood flanked by her golden daughter. Jacqueline did not look at the heavy titanium card on the plate. She did not look at Marcus. She kept her eyes locked on me, staring down her nose with an expression of sheer, unadulterated disgust. She smoothed the front of her designer evening gown, her diamonds catching the light of the chandeliers. She took a slow, deep breath, her lips tightening into a thin, venomous line as she prepared to deliver the ultimate verbal blow that would permanently sever me from the family empire. Jacqueline Vanguard did not walk. She glided. She moved with the predatory grace of a woman who had spent 40 years destroying anyone who threatened her pristine social standing. The entire ballroom seemed to orbit around her, adjusting to her gravitational pull as she approached our table. She came to a halt right next to Chloe, forming a suffocating wall of hostility. Preston stood to my left, Chloe to my right, and my mother loomed directly in front of me. I was completely boxed in. It was a calculated physical intimidation, meant to make me feel small, trapped, and entirely powerless. I could feel the collective gaze of 100 high society guests burning into my skin, waiting to see how the outcast daughter would handle the wrath of the family matriarch. I looked up into my mother's eyes and saw absolutely nothing. There was no warmth, There was no maternal instinct. There was just the cold, hard calculation of a woman examining a persistent stain on her white rug. "You have always been an ungrateful child, Maya," she began, her voice perfectly modulated to carry across the room without ever sounding like a shout. She spoke with the crisp, polished enunciation she used at her charity galas, but the words were pure poison. "From the day you decided you were too good for our traditions, you have been a constant source of embarrassment to me. I have spent my entire life building this family into a pillar of Black excellence. Your father and I gave you every advantage, every connection, every opportunity to be somebody important. And what did you do with it? You threw it all away to grade spelling tests in a rundown classroom." I kept my hands folded in my lap, refusing to break eye contact. "Do you know how exhausting it is to constantly defend your mediocre choices?" She continued, stepping closer so her expensive perfume completely overwhelmed the scent of our dinner. "My friends ask me why my daughter lives like a commoner. They ask me why you refuse to attend the sorority meetings, why you never show your face at the country club. I have to smile and pretend you are just finding yourself, but we both know the truth. You are exactly where you belong because you do not have the stomach for real success." She paused, letting her words sink in. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Everyone was holding their breath, watching the Vanguard Empire publicly excommunicate its weakest link. "You thought you were so brave walking away from our money?" she said, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "You thought you could just strike out on your own and build your little educational company. Did you really think I would just sit back and let you attach our prestigious family name to a doomed public school project?" My breath caught in my throat, but my face remained a mask of stone. 5 years ago, I had applied for a commercial loan to get my educational technology platform off the ground. I had a perfect business plan and a flawless credit score. But the bank mysteriously denied me at the last minute, citing unverified concerns about my financial stability. It was the darkest period of my life. I had spent months crying in my tiny apartment, believing I was a failure. "You look surprised," my mother mocked, leaning down so her face was only inches from mine. "You think I did not know you went to First National Bank begging for capital? The branch manager plays golf with your father, Maya. He called us the minute you walked out of his office. I am the one who told him to deny your application." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Even in this ruthless social circle, actively sabotaging your own child was shocking. "I told the bank manager you were mentally unstable," she confessed loudly, proudly, owning her sabotage. "I told him you were prone to manic episodes and that lending you a single dime would be a catastrophic financial risk. I killed your little business loan before the paperwork was even printed. And I would do it again. I protected the Vanguard name from being dragged through the mud by your inevitable bankruptcy. You are simply not built for business, Maya. You are weak." My mother then turned her attention away from me and aimed her venom directly at the man sitting quietly by my side. Marcus had not moved a muscle, but the energy radiating from his body was terrifying. He was staring at my mother like a predator analyzing its prey. "And then there is you," she sneered, looking Marcus up and down as if he were something scraping off the bottom of her shoe. "You thought you hit the absolute jackpot, did you not? You saw a wealthy family and thought you had secured your meal ticket for the rest of your life. You probably thought marrying a Vanguard meant you would never have to work another day in your miserable life. But you made a terrible miscalculation, Marcus. You married the defective daughter. You thought you were marrying into power, but you just tied yourself to a sinking ship. You are a gold digger who dug in the wrong spot." Marcus tilted his head, staring at my mother with an expression of pure lethal calm. He did not say a single word. He just let her dig her grave deeper. "I am done looking at you both," my mother announced, snapping her fingers at the banquet manager who was hovering nervously nearby. "You are a stain on your father's retirement night. You will pay the $1,600 for your wasted food immediately. Then you will stand up and you will walk out through the kitchen. You will take the service elevator down to the parking garage. I will not have my friends looking at you a second longer. Do not come to the family brunch tomorrow. You are done here." She turned her back to me, assuming the execution was complete. Chloe smirked, crossing her arms in triumph. Preston leaned forward, waiting for me to pull out a worn debit card and cry. They wanted me broken. They wanted me destroyed in front of the entire city. I took a slow, deep breath. I smoothed the napkin on my lap. I did not yell. I did not throw my drink. I smoothly reached into my black velvet clutch. I bypassed my standard bank cards. I moved past my driver license. My fingers brushed against the cold, heavy metal I had kept hidden from my family for years. I pulled out a solid titanium American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card that requires spending millions of dollars a year just to receive an invitation. I held it between my index and middle finger. I looked directly at Preston's sweating face, then at Chloe's suddenly confused eyes. I dropped the heavy titanium card directly onto the silver payment tray. It hit the metal surface with a loud, echoing clank that rang through the dead-silent ballroom like a gunshot. Preston broke the silence with a sharp, barking laugh. He reached out and picked up the heavy piece of metal from the silver tray. He turned the card over in his hands, rubbing his thumb across the raised numbers before tossing it back down with a look of absolute amusement. He looked at Chloe and let out a long, exaggerated sigh. "A metal card, Maya?" he asked, a mocking grin stretching across his flushed face. "What is this exactly? Some kind of novelty prop you ordered online to try and impress us? Did you buy a fake luxury credit card just to come to your father's retirement dinner and pretend you are not drowning in public school debt? You really thought you could drop a fake prop on the table and we would all just gasp and bow down to you? That is actually pathetic even for you." Jacqueline recoiled in sheer horror. Her eyes darted from the titanium card resting on the tray directly to Marcus. She took a step back, clutching her diamond necklace as if we were about to reach across the table and physically rob her. "Or it is stolen!" My mother screeched, her voice pitching into a high, hysterical register that carried over the soft jazz playing through the ballroom speakers. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger straight at my husband's chest. "You work in information technology, Marcus. You have access to client data. You cloned a credit card. I knew you were a criminal the moment Maya brought you into my house. I will not have the pristine Vanguard name dragged into a federal fraud investigation because my defective daughter decided to marry a common street hustler who commits identity theft to pay for a hotel dinner." I did not bother to defend my husband. I did not waste my breath explaining that the Centurion card sitting on the silver tray was tied to an account with an absolute zero limit. I just leaned back into the plush velvet sofa, resting my elbow on the armrest. I slowly began twisting the diamond ring on my right hand, utterly relaxed, watching them spiral into a paranoid frenzy. I let the silence hang, allowing my mother's wild accusations to echo in the ears of the prominent judges and doctors sitting at the adjacent tables. They were completely exposing their own toxic prejudice while I sat there sipping my sparkling water. Before my mother could demand that hotel security come and arrest us, the heavy brass doors near the kitchen violently swung open. The St. Regis banquet manager practically sprinted across the marble floor. His face was glistening with a thick layer of sweat, and he was clutching a leather folio so tightly against his chest, his knuckles were turning white. Jacqueline saw him approaching, and a triumphant smile immediately returned to her face. She smoothed down her evening gown and gestured toward us with an elegant wave of her hand. Finally, my mother announced loudly, "The manager is here to handle this. Charles, please call your security team and have these two removed from the premises immediately. They are trespassing and attempting to pay with fraudulent stolen property." The banquet manager did not even look at me. He completely ignored my mother's demands. He stepped right past the silver tray holding my titanium card and positioned himself directly behind Preston. Charles leaned down his face, a mask of absolute corporate terror. "Mr. Preston, I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt your family gathering." Charles whispered, his voice shaking, but loud enough that the surrounding tables went completely silent to eavesdrop. "We have a very severe problem." Preston waved a dismissive hand in the air, not even bothering to look at the sweating manager. "Put whatever it is on my tab, Charles. I am in the middle of handling a family dispute here. Run the card on file and bring us another bottle of the reserve champagne." Sir, it is your tab, Charles said, straightening his posture as his voice rose in sheer panic. I have tried to run the corporate visa you provided for the $50,000 open bar deposit. I ran the card 4 separate times. It has been completely declined for insufficient funds. The bank has placed a hard fraud hold on your entire account. Sir, if we do not secure a valid payment method in the next 3 minutes, I am legally required to shut down all the bars and instruct my staff to pull the premium liquor from the floor. The air in our corner of the ballroom vanished. The silence was no longer curious. It was absolutely deafening. Every single high society guest within a 50-foot radius heard the words insufficient funds. They heard the golden son-in-law, the supposed financial savior of the Vanguard Empire, was bouncing checks at a retirement gala. Chloe turned the color of ash. Her flawless posture instantly crumbled. She grabbed Preston's tuxedo sleeve, her perfectly manicured nails digging violently into the expensive black fabric. "Preston, what is he talking about?" Chloe demanded in a furious, frantic whisper. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. "You told me the corporate accounts were completely liquid. You told me you wired the $50,000 for the open bar yesterday morning. Tell him to run the card again. Preston, do not embarrass me in front of these people." Preston was actively sweating now. A dark red, blotchy rash was creeping up his neck. He snatched the leather folio from the manager's hands, staring at the 4 printed decline receipts. He realized the elite crowd was staring at him, their eyes burning with judgment. The wealthy socialites who had just been praising him were now whispering behind their hands, smelling the blood in the water. He desperately needed a lifeline. He needed to deflect the humiliation before it destroyed his reputation entirely. Preston stood up so abruptly his heavy chair nearly tipped over backwards. He pointed a shaking finger directly toward the grand stage at the front of the ballroom. "It is a simple bank error," Preston shouted, his voice echoing across the room. "It is a massive security hold because of the sheer volume of liquid capital moving through my firm's accounts today. Do you people not understand high finance?" He turned around, desperately searching for my father, who was already rushing down from the stage with a panicked expression. Preston puffed out his chest, trying to project the confidence of a billionaire. "The Apex Partners executives just pulled up to the valet," Preston announced, pointing toward the main lobby doors. "They are walking through those doors right now to sign the massive buyout I orchestrated. The moment their ink hits my contract, this entire hotel is paid for 10 times over. There is absolutely no reason to panic." The physical distance between my side of the table and theirs seemed to stretch miles, capturing the absolute stark contrast between my serene composure and their sudden chaotic panic. I remained anchored to the velvet sofa, my hands resting lightly in my lap, while the Vanguard family structure rapidly deteriorated right in front of me. What in God's name is going on over here? The booming, panicked voice of my father, Reginald Vanguard, shattered the remaining murmurs of the crowd. He pushed his way through the circle of gawking socialites, his custom tuxedo looking suddenly too tight across his chest. The heavy gold watch on his wrist flashed under the chandeliers as he aggressively wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead. He had just stepped down from the main stage, expecting to bask in the glory of his retirement, only to find his golden son-in-law cornered by a frantic hotel manager holding a stack of declined receipts. "Preston," my father demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous raspy hiss as he closed the distance. "Charles here looks like he is about to have a heart attack. Jacqueline is screaming about fraud. Why are my country club peers whispering that my son-in-law cannot afford to pay for a hotel bar?" Preston immediately shifted into his practiced, hyper-confident salesman persona. The blotchy red rash on his neck was still visible, but he forced a blinding, arrogant smile onto his face. He aggressively clapped his hand onto my father's shoulder, a gesture of false camaraderie meant to project total control. "Reginald, please do not let these service workers upset you." Preston chuckled smoothly, waving his hand dismissively at the trembling banquet manager. "It is a completely standard security protocol. I transferred an absolutely massive amount of liquid capital across our offshore accounts this morning to finalize the escrow for the buyout. The bank simply flagged the sudden movement of funds and placed a temporary hold on my corporate card. It is a minor inconvenience caused by the sheer magnitude of the wealth we are moving today." My father's chest heaved as he processed the lie. But Preston, I gave you absolute unrestricted access to the family master accounts. I handed you the keys to the entire Vanguard logistics empire because you promised me you knew how to navigate these elite financial waters. You told me giving you total control was the only way to secure the buyout. And I did secure it. Preston fired back, his voice rising in defensive arrogance. I brought you the white whale, Reginald. I got Apex Partners to the table. The mention of the name sent a visible ripple of awe through the eavesdropping guests. Apex Partners was a legendary shadowy private equity firm known for ruthless efficiency and bottomless pockets. They swallowed up failing empires, gutted them, and turned them into gold. Getting them to acquire a regional logistics company was considered a financial miracle. Chloe immediately stepped forward, linking her arm through Preston's, her eyes flashing with renewed vicious entitlement. She glared at my father, her voice dripping with condescension. Dad, you need to calm down and trust your brilliant son-in-law, Chloe snapped. Preston is a financial mastermind. He understands how high-level acquisitions work. He isn't some low-level IT worker playing with a modest paycheck. She shot a venomous glare directly at Marcus before turning back to my father. Preston leveraged our assets perfectly. Apex Partners is the most exclusive firm on the East Coast. When they sign that paperwork tonight, Vanguard Logistics goes global and your retirement fund quadruples. You trusted Preston because he actually knows how to run a business, unlike the defective branch of this family, currently sitting in the shadows. Jacqueline nodded vigorously, her hands clasped together in desperate agreement. She shot me a look of pure loathing. Listen to Chloe, Reginald. Preston is a professional. We gave him control because he actually belongs in these rooms. We are not going to let a minor banking glitch or Maya's pathetic attempts to ruin this evening distract us from the biggest triumph of our lives. My father wiped his forehead again, his eyes darting between Preston's forced smile and the banquet manager's terrified face. But the accounts are frozen, Preston. If Apex Partners walks into this ballroom and sees that we cannot even clear a bar tab, they will smell blood. They will assume we are over-leveraged. If this deal falls through, the leverage you pulled will bankrupt us. We will lose everything. The warehouses, the fleet, the house, everything. Preston scoffed, straightening his bow tie with a dismissive jerk. They are not going to walk. I have been in direct communication with the primary decision-makers at Apex for 6 months. I know exactly how they operate. They love me. They practically begged me to let them buy you out. They are pulling up to the valet stand as we speak. In exactly 5 minutes, their executives are going to walk through those grand double doors, shake my hand, and sign a $50 million check that makes all of this petty cash drama completely irrelevant. Preston leaned heavily on the table, staring down at me and Marcus with a look of absolute unhinged triumph. So you two can take your little prop credit card, sneak out the back door, and go back to your miserable, unremarkable lives. The adults are about to do real business. The tension at the table was suffocating. Chloe smiled wickedly. Jacqueline crossed her arms, her chin tilted up in aristocratic victory. Reginald exhaled a long, shaky breath, choosing to blindly believe the charismatic white savior he had handed his entire legacy over to. They stood united, a wall of arrogance and entitlement, waiting for their billionaire saviors to walk through the doors and validate their cruelty. Then the silence broke. A deep, resonant sound rumbled from the velvet sofa. It started low, vibrating with a rich, dark timbre before building into a full, booming laugh. It was a laugh completely devoid of humor. It was the sound of a predator amused by the frantic scurrying of trapped prey. Marcus was laughing. The sheer force of his laughter echoed off the marble pillars, instantly silencing the entire corner of the ballroom. Chloe's wicked smile vanished. Preston's arrogant posture stiffened. Jacqueline and Reginald turned, staring at my husband as if he had just grown a second head. Marcus slowly let the laughter fade, though the dangerous, unbothered amusement never left his eyes. He leaned forward, the casual slouch of his posture disappearing as he planted his elbows on his knees. He reached down and meticulously adjusted his heavy tailored silver cuffs, taking his time making them wait in agonizing suspense. When his cuffs were perfectly aligned, he slowly raised his head. His dark eyes locked dead onto Preston's sweating face, pinning the man in place with a gaze that felt heavy enough to crush bone. "What on earth do you find so amusing, boy?" Reginald barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Stop that infernal laughing and show some respect." B-cam cuts to a tight, intense close-up of my eyes. They gleam with sheer anticipation. I know exactly what is about to happen. Then the invisible camera snaps back to a wide shot tracking me as I leisurely sink deeper into the velvet sofa, crossing my legs and letting the spectacle unfold. Marcus did not flinch at my father's outburst. He smoothly rose to his full height. Standing at 6'4", he towered over Preston and my father. He took one deliberate step forward, positioning his broad shoulders directly in front of me, seamlessly shielding me from the toxic energy of my family. He was no longer the quiet, supportive husband lingering in the background. The dormant volcano had just erupted. "I find it highly amusing, Reginald, that you actually believe a single word coming out of this man's mouth." Marcus spoke in a low, calm voice that resonated with absolute authority. "You handed over the keys to a generational empire, to a man who does not even know how to balance a spreadsheet without hiding his losses in shell companies." Preston took a shaky step back. "How dare you speak to my father-in-law that way? You are nothing but a glorified IT guy. You fix routers for a living. Keep your mouth shut before I have you arrested for trespassing." Marcus tilted his head, a chilling smile returning to his face. "A glorified IT guy. Is that what Chloe told you to make you feel better about your own staggering incompetence? Let us talk about your brilliance, Preston. Let us talk about the 42% debt-to-equity ratio Vanguard Logistics is currently drowning in." Reginald froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Chloe let out a sharp gasp. "Let us discuss the 3 bridge loans you defaulted on last quarter," Marcus continued, his voice cutting through the ballroom like a scythe. "Or maybe we should talk about the hidden offshore accounts in the Caymans. The ones you desperately funneled company pensions into to cover your massive trading losses from last year. You thought transferring that capital today would magically fix the books before Apex partners looked too closely. You thought you could mask a hemorrhage with a Band-Aid." Preston looked like he was going to vomit. His eyes darted frantically around the room. "Shut up! Shut up right now!" he practically shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "You hacked us. You illegally accessed classified corporate files. That is federal espionage. I will see you rot in a federal prison." Jacqueline finally broke out of her stunned paralysis. Her perfectly manicured facade shattered into absolute hysteria. "Security!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Charles, get the police in here right now. This thug has hacked our family business. He is a cyber criminal. I want him in handcuffs. I want them both thrown in a cell. Reginald, do something." My father was hyperventilating, clutching his chest as he stared at Marcus in sheer terror. "How do you know those numbers?" Reginald demanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying realization that his empire was crumbling. "Those files are restricted to the highest executive level. Nobody outside the board knows about the bridge loans. How did you get access to my private ledgers?" Marcus adjusted his jacket, looking down at the 3 panicked individuals with cold, unyielding disgust. "When you are preparing to buy an asset, you do not just read the glossy brochure Preston handed you," Marcus replied, his tone dripping with lethal precision. "Due diligence requires looking under the floorboards of rotting houses. I did not hack anything, Reginald. I simply requested the real financials. And what I found was a hollowed-out shell of a company being driven straight into bankruptcy by a man you blindly trusted just because he looked the part." Preston was hyperventilating, now tugging at his bow tie as if it were strangling him. "You are lying," he spat, though the sheer terror in his eyes proved every word Marcus said was absolute truth. "Apex Partners knows my value. They know I am the only reason this company is still standing. They are signing the deal with me today. They do not care about some fabricated numbers from a jealous nobody." Jacqueline clutched Reginald's arm, shaking it violently. "Do not listen to him, Reginald. He is trying to sabotage Preston because he is jealous. He is just a broke public school husband trying to cause a scene. Preston saved us. You know he did." Reginald looked desperately between Preston and Marcus, the reality of his financial ruin fighting against his stubborn pride. He wanted to believe his golden son-in-law. He needed to believe the lie because the truth meant he had sacrificed his legacy for nothing. Before Reginald could muster another defense, a loud grinding noise echoed from the back of the room. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom forcefully swung open. The sound was so definitive, it commanded the attention of every single guest in the venue. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The waiters froze in their tracks. 4 men walked through the entrance. They moved in perfect unison, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable power. They wore immaculate, bespoke dark suits that cost more than most luxury cars. Their expressions were unreadable sharp and intensely focused. They were flanked by the St. Regis Hotel security detail, who scrambled to keep the path clear for them. Reginald's eyes widened in sheer relief. He completely abandoned the argument with Marcus. He shoved past Chloe and Preston, his panic instantly transforming back into pathetic, fawning subservience. "They are here," Reginald gasped, straightening his jacket and plastering a desperate, welcoming smile onto his face. "That is them. The executive board of Apex Partners. I told you they would come. Preston, get over here and stand next to me. We have a $50 million contract to sign." Reginald practically ran across the marble floor, leaving his wife and golden daughter behind, rushing to greet the executives from Apex Partners. Reginald Vanguard, a man who had spent his entire adult life demanding that people bow to him, practically sprinted across the polished marble. He moved with a frantic, uncoordinated desperation that bordered on the grotesque. He slipped slightly, his patent leather shoes making a harsh squeaking sound that cut through the dead air of the ballroom. He shoved past a table of stunned corporate board members, his custom tuxedo pulling awkwardly at the shoulders as he threw his arms wide open. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving, projecting an aura of pure, terrified energy. He had spent months telling his country club peers about this exact moment, and now he was rushing to secure the illusion before it shattered. He reached the 4 men just as they cleared the grand entrance. The lead executive, a tall, imposing man with silver hair at his temples and eyes like chipped ice, stopped abruptly. Reginald thrust his right hand forward, his face stretched into a painfully wide, artificial grin that completely failed to reach his panicked eyes. "Gentlemen, welcome," Reginald boomed, pitching his voice loud enough so that every single guest in the St. Regis ballroom could hear his triumph. "Welcome to my retirement gala. I am Reginald Vanguard, and I cannot express how honored we are to have Apex Partners here tonight. This is a historic moment for Vanguard Logistics." Reginald turned frantically, waving for Preston to join him. Preston hurried over, aggressively adjusting his tie, trying desperately to shake off the utter humiliation of the declined credit card. He squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest, attempting to mimic the icy authority of the men standing before him. He needed this validation to survive the night. He needed these executives to confirm his status as the brilliant heir to the empire. "And this," Reginald announced, his voice trembling slightly with desperate pride, "is my son-in-law, Preston, the architect of this entire acquisition. He has been the point of contact for your firm for the last 6 months. He is the brilliant mind who brought our 2 empires together." Preston stepped forward, a smug, relieved smirk returning to his flushed face. He extended his hand toward the lead executive, ready to claim his victory and secure his position as the new king of the family. "It is a pleasure to finally meet face to face," Preston said smoothly, pasting on his best corporate smile. "We have the final contracts ready in the private suite upstairs." The lead executive did not move. He did not smile. He did not extend his own hand. He looked down at Preston's outstretched palm with the detached, clinical expression of a man inspecting a piece of trash on the sidewalk. He did not say a single word to Preston. He simply let the silence stretch heavy and suffocating until Preston's smug smirk began to falter, slowly sliding off his face like melting wax. Preston's hand hung in the empty space between them, trembling slightly as the agonizing seconds ticked by. The executive shifted his cold gaze, looking entirely past Preston. He looked past my father's frozen, panicked smile. He looked past my mother, who was clutching her diamond necklace in sudden, terrible confusion. His icy eyes swept over the sea of high society guests, searching the room with absolute precision. Then his eyes locked onto the back corner of the ballroom. They locked onto our table. They locked directly onto Marcus. The lead executive adjusted his bespoke jacket and stepped forward. He did not walk around Preston. He walked straight through him. His shoulder forcefully clipped Preston's arm, shoving the golden son-in-law aside, as if he were nothing more than a minor physical obstruction. The three other executives followed in perfect unison, stepping past my father, leaving Reginald standing with his hands still outstretched to empty air. My gaze tracked Reginald's complete unraveling. His mouth opened and closed in mute horror as he watched the men from Apex Partners march down the center aisle. The crowd parted instantly. The elite socialites, the judges, the doctors, and the logistics board members scrambled to get out of the way, pulling their chairs back and pressing themselves against the walls. The only sound in the massive ballroom was the sharp, synchronized clicking of the executives' leather shoes striking the marble floor. They moved with a terrifying, singular purpose. Chloe let out a strangled gasp, stepping backward as the men approached our section. She stumbled slightly, her heels catching on the hem of her gown. Jacqueline's face turned the color of wet ash. She looked at the approaching executives, then looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization that she had vastly underestimated the situation. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the Vanguard family was collapsing right in front of her. I leaned back into the velvet sofa, crossing my legs and folding my hands. My heart was pounding fiercely against my ribs, but on the outside I was a portrait of total unbothered serenity. Beside me, Marcus remained perfectly still. The dangerous, amused smile had faded from his lips, replaced by a mask of cold, absolute authority. He did not stand up. He waited, letting the gravity of the moment settle over the room. The lead executive reached our table. He stopped right where Chloe had been screaming just moments before. He ignored the spilled water glass. He ignored the titanium black card resting on the silver payment tray. He turned his body entirely to face Marcus. The room held its breath. My mother took a shaky step backward, bumping into Preston, who was staring at the scene with wide, bloodshot eyes, completely paralyzed by shock. Preston's mouth was hanging open, his breathing shallow and rapid. The lead executive planted his feet, looked at my husband and bowed. It was not a brief nod. It was a deep, respectful bow, the kind of pure deference given only to a man who held absolute, unquestionable power. The three executives behind him immediately followed suit, bowing in perfect synchronization. When the lead executive straightened up, he reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy, leather-bound folio. He held it out with both hands, presenting it to Marcus like an offering to a king. "The forensic audits are complete, Mr. CEO," the executive announced, his voice booming across the dead silent ballroom, carrying to every single corner, ensuring that my father, my mother Chloe, and Preston heard every single syllable. "We have successfully mapped the offshore accounts and the defaulted loans. We are ready to proceed with the liquidation." A dramatic slow push in focuses directly on my face. I simply smiled, picking up my crystal glass and taking a slow, refreshing sip of sparkling water. The camera glides seamlessly around my shoulder, panning outward to reveal the completely stunned, terrified faces of my family. Total suffocating silence smothered the ballroom. The string quartet had stopped playing minutes ago. The hotel waiters were frozen like statues, holding their heavy trays of champagne. The only sound cutting through the heavy air was the sharp, sudden crack of crystal. The glass slipped from Jacqueline's limp fingers and shattered violently against the marble floor. Shards of glass scattered across the toes of her designer heels, but she did not even flinch. She was completely paralyzed, staring wide-eyed at the man she had just spent the last 20 minutes calling a common street hustler and a criminal. Marcus did not gloat. He did not smile. He reached out with steady, deliberate hands and accepted the heavy leather-bound folio from the lead executive. "Thank you, David," Marcus said, his dark eyes scanning the embossed cover. "Your team performed exceptionally well under such a tight deadline." The lead executive, the man who had just completely ignored my father's desperate greetings, bowed his head again. "We live to serve Apex Partners, sir." Reginald looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the inevitable click. His mouth hung open, his breath rattling in his throat as his brain desperately tried to process the impossible reality standing right in front of him. Preston had physically collapsed against the edge of the dining table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the tablecloth to keep from sliding to the floor. The golden boy was hyperventilating his entire fraudulent reality, imploding in a matter of seconds. Chloe was clutching her chest, her perfectly contoured face pale and contorted with sheer disbelief. Marcus turned his back on them. He did not run. He did not rush. He walked slowly toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. His footsteps were heavy and rhythmic, commanding the undivided attention of every single guest in the venue. The sea of wealthy socialites, elite judges, and corporate board members parted instantly for him. The whispers had completely died down. They were witnessing a slaughter, and nobody dared to breathe. Marcus climbed the short flight of stairs to the main stage. He walked directly to the microphone stand, adjusting it with one hand while holding the devastating financial audit in the other. He looked out over the crowd of 100 elite guests. His voice when he spoke was dangerously calm. It did not boom with the frantic desperation of my father or the arrogant bluster of Preston. It resonated with the chilling absolute certainty of a man who owned the room and everyone in it. "Good evening, everyone," Marcus said, his voice echoing smoothly across the vaulted ceiling. "For those of you who have not formally made my acquaintance, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Marcus Vanguard. I am the elusive founder and chief executive officer of Apex Partners." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Board members of Vanguard Logistics dropped their jaws. The wealthy elite who had spent years ignoring my husband suddenly looked at him as if he were a god walking among mortals. "Yes, I took my wife's family name when we married, out of respect for the legacy her grandfather built." Marcus continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. "A legacy I have quietly protected, while the current leadership did everything in their power to destroy it. For the last 7 years, I have sat quietly at the very edges of your lavish country club dinners and your exclusive holiday galas. I have been intentionally cropped out of family photographs. I have been seated at the overflow tables near the kitchen. I have been mocked, belittled, and dismissed by the people sitting at that front table because I preferred wearing a simple off-the-rack suit instead of head-to-toe Gucci." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the crowd before locking dead onto Jacqueline, whose face was currently buried in her trembling hands. They looked at my quiet demeanor and assumed I was weak. They looked at my modest lifestyle and assumed I was a failure. They were so incredibly busy judging my wardrobe and my supposed lack of pedigree that they completely failed to realize they were insulting the man who practically owns the banking infrastructure they rely on to fund their extravagant lifestyles. While my mother-in-law was screaming about how I was a glorified IT guy dragging down their pristine reputation, I was sitting in a boardroom dictating the global market trends that decide whether her premium credit cards clear. The crowd was spellbound. Several board members of Vanguard Logistics were sweating visibly, pulling at their collars as they realized the magnitude of their oversight. They had blindly followed Reginald's endorsement of Preston, completely ignoring the quiet titan sitting right under their noses. Marcus tapped the leather folio against the wooden podium. The sound was like a judge's gavel striking the block. "You see, true power does not need to scream." Marcus continued, his dark eyes scanning the room. "True power does not need to rent out the St. Regis ballroom and bounce a $50,000 deposit check just to prove it exists. True wealth does not require putting a corporate entity into catastrophic debt just to buy a new fleet of imported sports cars to impress people who do not actually care about you. I built Apex Partners from the ground up by recognizing true value where others saw absolutely nothing. And more importantly, by recognizing rot before it completely infects the entire structure. Due diligence requires looking under the floorboards of rotting houses to see what is hiding in the dark." Marcus turned his body slightly, stepping away from the podium. He looked directly at my father, who was now clutching his chest, taking ragged, desperate breaths. Beside him, Preston was practically weeping, his carefully gelled hair falling into his panicked eyes. Marcus slowly raised the heavy leather-bound folio, holding the forensic financial audit high enough for the entire ballroom to see. Now let's talk about why your company is actually bankrupt, Reginald. With a sharp flick of Marcus's wrist, the massive digital projectors flanking the main stage instantly shifted. The elegant gold and black graphics celebrating my father's retirement vanished. In their place, stark, glaring white spreadsheets illuminated the dim ballroom. Rows of financial data bank transfer logs and blazing red deficit columns filled the massive screens for every single prominent guest to see. The visual transition was jarring. The room erupted into confused murmurs as the elite socialites squinted at the projected documents. I watched the scene unfold with an incredible sense of vindication. The imaginary camera panned aggressively back and forth, matching the frantic rhythm of a high-stakes tennis match. It snapped to Marcus, standing tall and commanding at the podium, illuminated by the harsh glow of his own financial trap. Then it whipped across the room to Preston, whose face was entirely bathed in the damning light of the screens. Preston looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the executioner reach for the lever. For the past 6 months, you have been operating under the assumption that your son-in-law was orchestrating a highly complex, lucrative buyout, Marcus announced, his voice slicing through the rising murmurs. You believed he was navigating offshore escrow accounts and setting up Vanguard logistics for a global expansion. You gave him unrestricted access to the corporate master accounts because he convinced you he was a financial visionary. Marcus pressed a button on the podium console, and a specific column on the massive screens highlighted in bright yellow. But Preston is not a visionary, Marcus stated flatly. He is a parasite. Reginald took a stumbling step toward the stage, his eyes darting frantically over the projected numbers. His breath hitched audibly. Those are the employee pension funds. Exactly. Marcus confirmed, his dark eyes flashing with lethal precision. He turned his gaze back to Preston, pinning the sweating man under a heavy, suffocating silence. Over the last 2 fiscal quarters, Preston systematically siphoned exactly $5 million from the Vanguard Employee Retirement Fund. He bypassed your internal audits by routing the capital through 3 separate dummy corporations he set up under his own name. He did not secure a buyout from Apex Partners Reginald. He used our name to fabricate fake term sheets while he bled your company dry. The collective gasp from the audience was deafening. Stealing from a corporate entity was one thing, but stealing $5 million from the pension funds of blue-collar warehouse workers and truck drivers was a scandal that would bring federal investigators crashing through the front doors. The high society guests who had just been fawning over Preston now recoiled from him as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. Jacqueline clutched her throat, swaying unsteadily on her expensive heels. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, Preston would never do that. He comes from a good family. He is a wealth manager. Where did the money go? Marcus did not miss a beat. He tapped the console again, and a new set of documents appeared on the screens. These were not corporate ledgers. They were wire transfers, casino receipts, and aggressively worded collection notices. It went exactly where all desperate, foolish money goes, Marcus declared, his voice dripping with utter contempt. Las Vegas. Your brilliant son-in-law did not lose $5 million trying to aggressively expand your logistics fleet. He lost it betting on point spreads. He developed a massive, catastrophic sports gambling addiction. He played the high roller, throwing away the life savings of your loyal employees on basketball games and horse races to impress his bookies. When the losses mounted and the collectors came calling, he panicked. He used your master access to drain the pension funds to cover his own pathetic debts. The camera perspective swung violently back to Preston. His pristine tailored tuxedo now looked like a straitjacket. Sweat poured down his face, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He looked around the room, seeing the absolute disgust burning in the eyes of his peers. The wealthy socialites, the prominent judges, the banking executives, they were all staring at him with pure, unadulterated revulsion. The illusion of the golden boy was completely dead. He was nothing but a common thief, a degenerate gambler wearing a stolen suit. The crushing weight of his exposed reality finally snapped whatever fragile thread of sanity Preston had left, his face contorted into a mask of feral animalistic rage. "You ruined me!" Preston shrieked, his voice cracking into a humiliating, hysterical pitch. He shoved a horrified waiter out of the way, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. Preston charged the stage, sprinting with blind, reckless fury. He hurled himself forward, intending to tackle Marcus to the ground. He did not even make it to the first step. The security detail from Apex Partners, the 4 men in bespoke suits who had flanked the executives, moved with terrifying explosive speed. They were not hotel guards. They were highly trained private security, and they reacted instantly. Before Preston's foot could even touch the wooden stairs, 2 massive guards intercepted him. They hit him with the force of a freight train. Preston let out a breathless grunt as he was violently tackled. The guards slammed him face first into the polished marble floor. The sickening thud of the impact echoed through the ballroom, followed immediately by the sound of Preston whimpering in pain. One guard planted a heavy knee firmly between Preston's shoulder blades, pinning him entirely to the ground, while the other twisted his arms behind his back with practiced, ruthless efficiency. Preston thrashed and kicked, looking utterly pathetic as he stained his expensive tuxedo against the floorboards. Reginald stood paralyzed, watching his chosen heir groveling in the dirt. His entire world, his legacy, his wealth, and his pristine reputation had been vaporized in less than 5 minutes. His hands shook violently as the reality of the bankruptcy and the federal crimes committed under his roof set in. Desperate for any shred of comfort, any anchor in the storm, Reginald slowly turned away from the stage. He looked toward Chloe. He looked at his beautiful golden daughter, fully expecting to see her weeping in absolute horror. He expected her to be devastated, completely broken by the revelation that her perfect husband was a criminal who had destroyed their family. Reginald reached out a trembling hand, seeking to comfort the daughter he had always favored. But Marcus, standing tall and untouched at the podium, simply adjusted the microphone. The cold, unyielding timbre of his voice stopped my father dead in his tracks. "Do not look to her for sympathy," Reginald Marcus said, his words slicing through the heavy silence like a scalpel. "She is not a victim in this scenario. She did not just sit idly by while he gambled your empire away. She knew everything." A slow, creeping tilt down focused entirely on my face as I sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa. I did not blink. I simply watched as my sister's meticulously crafted facade, the pristine image of the flawless high society princess, physically crumbled under the blinding light of the ballroom projectors. Chloe took a shaky step backward, her expensive heels catching on the hem of her designer gown. She shook her head in frantic, jerky motions, her perfectly styled hair falling into her widening eyes. "That is a lie," she gasped, her voice shrill and trembling, echoing weakly into the vast space of the ballroom. "Daddy, do not listen to him. He is making this up. He has always been jealous of Preston. He is just trying to humiliate us." Marcus did not argue with her. He did not need to raise his voice or engage in petty family bickering. He simply reached over to the podium console and tapped the audio input interface. "When you use company-issued smartphones to conduct your daily business," Marcus said, his voice carrying a lethal clinical detachment, "you are legally subject to corporate surveillance protocols, especially when those devices are pinging off servers connected to the master accounts you are actively draining." Marcus pressed a button. A sharp hiss of static echoed through the massive St. Regis speakers, followed immediately by the undeniable crystal-clear sound of Preston's panicked voice. "We are down 5 million, Chloe. 5 million. The recording blared, Preston's voice vibrating with raw terror and desperation. "The guys in Vegas are threatening to freeze my offshore holdings. Your father is going to want to see the pension ledgers by the end of the quarter. I cannot cover this. I am going to jail, Chloe. We are both going to jail." Then came Chloe's voice. It was not the sweet melodic tone she used at country club luncheons or charity galas. It was cold, calculated, and dripping with absolute irritation. "Then move the numbers around." "Preston, the recorded?" Chloe snapped, her voice sounding utterly callous. Skim it from the employee 401k match. They are truck drivers and warehouse workers. They do not even read their statements. I need the final payment cleared for the Cartier diamond set by Tuesday. And you still have not wired the $80,000 for Daddy's retirement gala at the St. Regis. If we cancel that room, the entire board will know we are broke. Just take it from the pension fund and we will figure it out later. Stop whining and handle it. A collective gasp of pure revulsion sucked the remaining oxygen out of the ballroom. The Vanguard Logistics board members sitting near the front row looked physically nauseated. They were staring at Chloe as if she had just confessed to a brutal murder. She had not merely turned a blind eye to Preston's crippling gambling addiction. She had actively directed him to steal the retirement savings of hardworking blue-collar employees simply to finance her custom jewelry and the very party they were currently attending. The sheer audacity, the utter lack of human empathy was staggering to witness. Jacqueline snapped. The sound of her golden child explicitly orchestrating a federal felony was simply too much for her fragile reality to process. She lunged forward, her diamond necklace catching the light, as she pointed a shaking, manicured finger at the stage. "Turn that off!" Jacqueline shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the marble walls, sounding completely unhinged. "Turn it off right now. It is fake. You fabricated this. It is one of those AI-generated deep fakes. You are trying to frame my daughter because you have always hated this family. Reginald, do something. Have him arrested. Have security throw him out." Marcus paused the audio track. He looked down at my mother from the stage with a gaze so chilling and absolute, it stopped her frantic screaming instantly. "An AI-generated deep fake, Jacqueline Marcus?" asked, his tone dangerously quiet, cutting through her hysteria. "Is an AI deep fake wearing the exact custom Cartier diamond collar referenced in the recording? The one currently resting around your daughter's neck? The one purchased with stolen funds exactly 3 days after that phone call took place?" Every single eye in the ballroom snapped directly to Chloe's throat. The heavy diamond piece sparkled under the crystal chandeliers, suddenly looking less like a symbol of elite wealth and more like a glowing neon admission of guilt. The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe's hands flew to her neck, trying desperately to cover the diamonds, but it was entirely too late. The absolute finality of the proof crushed her completely. The lifelong illusion was dead. The high society princess, the golden child who could do no wrong, was exposed as a common embezzler and a thief. She collapsed to her knees right there in the middle of the center aisle. The pristine posture she had maintained her entire life vanished into thin air. She bent forward, sobbing hysterically, her chest heaving as thick black tracks of expensive mascara ran down her perfectly contoured cheeks. She wept with the ugly, guttural sounds of a woman who knew she was going to federal prison. Preston was still pinned to the floor by the Apex security guards, groaning in pain, unable to even look at his weeping wife. Jacqueline stood frozen, staring at her golden child, completely unable to process the total destruction of her dynasty. Reginald Vanguard, the man who had spent his entire adult life demanding absolute deference from everyone around him, stared blankly at the digital screens projecting his financial ruin. He looked at his weeping daughter sobbing on the marble floor. He looked at his disgraced son-in-law bleeding and restrained in the dirt. Then he looked at the Vanguard Logistics board members, who were already pulling out their smartphones, no doubt calling their own legal counsel to rapidly distance themselves from the radioactive crater that was now the Vanguard family. The realization hit Reginald with the crushing force of a physical blow. There was no corporate buyout. There was no golden parachute to save his retirement. There was only a drained pension fund, $5 million in missing capital, and a federal indictment waiting for him on Monday morning. He had lost his company, his legacy, his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. Reginald turned his body slowly, facing the stage. He looked up at the man he had spent 7 years treating like absolute garbage. He abandoned every ounce of his pride, every shred of his carefully cultivated arrogance. His legs gave out entirely. Reginald Vanguard dropped heavily to his knees right in front of the stage. He clasped his hands together, looking up at Marcus with wide, bloodshot eyes, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Please. Reginald begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate sob that echoed through the dead, silent ballroom. Please, Marcus, I am begging you. You have to buy the company. Take it for pennies. Take it for absolutely nothing. Just absorb the massive debt. Cover the missing pension fund before the feds find out. Please, you have the money. You have the power. You have to save me. I cannot go to federal prison. Please, Marcus. Reginald Vanguard dropped heavily to his knees right in front of the stage. The sharp sound of his kneecaps hitting the polished marble echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. His custom-tailored tuxedo was suddenly wrinkled and disheveled, his silk tie hanging askew around his neck. He looked like a man who had just been dragged out of a violent shipwreck. He clasped his hands together, holding them up toward the stage in a gesture of absolute pathetic surrender. Marcus, listen to me. Reginald pleaded, his voice stripped entirely of its former booming authority. His breath rattled in his chest, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I will sign it all over right now. Tonight. I will give you Vanguard Logistics. Take the international fleet, take the coastal warehouses, take the government shipping contracts. Take the entire empire for $1. Just assume the corporate liabilities. Cover the missing $5 million in the pension fund before the federal investigators find out. You are Apex partners. $5 million is nothing to you. It is pocket change. We are family, Marcus. You cannot let me die in a federal penitentiary. Reginald grabbed the wooden edge of the stage, his knuckles turning white as he pulled himself up slightly. Think about what this means, he begged, desperate tears finally spilling over his weathered cheeks. Think about the culture. We have spent decades building Black generational wealth in this city. You know exactly how hard it is for us to build empires like this in this country. You cannot let the establishment tear it down. We have to protect our legacy. You are one of us. Jacqueline did not hesitate. She abandoned her weeping golden daughter on the floor without a second glance. She literally stepped over Preston's pinned, thrashing body to get to the front of the room. She scrambled toward the stage, her expensive heels slipping awkwardly on the marble. She dropped to her knees right beside her husband, reaching her diamond-clad hands upward. Her face, previously twisted in aristocratic disgust, now stretched into a grotesque, sickening mask of desperate affection. Marcus. Please, Jacqueline cried, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. You are our brilliant son. I always told Reginald you were special. We always knew you had this incredible mind hiding behind that quiet exterior. We were just testing you all these years, pushing you to reach your full potential. You are part of this family. You are our blood now. You have to save us. We love you. Marcus looked down at them. He stood perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the edges of the wooden podium. He observed my kneeling parents with the detached clinical observation of a scientist studying insects trapped in a glass jar. His handsome face remained carved from absolute stone. There was no triumphant gloating, no arrogant smirk, and absolutely zero pity. Generational wealth. Marcus repeated the words, tasting like poison on his tongue. You did not build generational wealth, Reginald. You built a fragile house of cards on the backs of blue-collar workers who trusted you with their futures. You stole their retirement savings to buy your imported sports cars and fund your exclusive country club memberships. That is not a legacy. That is a criminal enterprise. He shifted his dark, icy gaze to Jacqueline, who visibly recoiled under the crushing weight of his disdain. And do not ever insult my intelligence by calling me your son. For 7 years I was the help. I was the glorified IT guy you intentionally hid in the corner because my presence offended your delicate high society sensibilities. 20 minutes ago you called me a street hustler. I do not owe you salvation. I do not owe you a single dime. Now it was my turn. Down in the audience, still seated at our isolated table in the back corner of the room, I took a slow, deep breath. An extreme close-up would capture my hands resting quietly on my lap. I unclasped my fingers. I smoothed the heavy silk fabric of my dress with deliberate, perfectly calm motions. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The imaginary camera tracked me from behind, following my path as I stepped out from the shadows and began the long walk down the center aisle. The massive ballroom was completely silent. The elite guests held their breath, pressing themselves against the walls to get out of my way. The only sound was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels striking the marble floor. I walked past the stunned, horrified faces of the corporate board members. I walked past Chloe, who was still curled in a pathetic sobbing ball on the floor, drowning in her ruined mascara and her stolen Cartier diamonds. I walked past Preston, whose face was pressed firmly into the dirt by my husband's private security detail. I reached the front of the room. Reginald and Jacqueline were still on their knees, begging and weeping. They turned their heads and looked up at me in utter confusion, their tear-streaked faces twisted with bewilderment. They did not understand why I was stepping forward. In their minds, I was still just Maya, the disappointing middle child, the family failure who married a nobody and worked a meaningless job. I ignored them completely. I climbed the short flight of wooden stairs and stepped onto the stage, taking my place right beside Marcus. He looked at me, a genuine warm smile finally breaking through his cold, icy facade. He reached out and gently took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine, grounding me in the reality of our shared victory. Marcus turned his attention back to my kneeling parents. He stepped backward, moving away from the podium, and gracefully gestured toward the microphone stand with his free hand. "You are making a fundamental error in your desperate negotiations," Reginald Marcus said smoothly, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent ballroom. "I am just the money. I fund the corporate acquisitions, but I do not dictate how the new assets are ultimately repurposed. Vanguard Logistics is being permanently dissolved, and your entire real estate portfolio is being absorbed into a new commercial education division. I do not make the acquisition decisions for that division. If you want to beg for your freedom, you need to speak to the actual buyer." The camera tracks me with a smooth, continuous slider shot, capturing the exact moment I uncross my legs and rise from the velvet sofa. I do not rush. I do not hesitate. I smooth the fabric of my dress, with slow, deliberate hands, feeling the heavy silk settle perfectly around my silhouette. For my entire life, I have walked through these ballrooms, pressing myself against the walls, making myself as small as physically possible to avoid drawing the ire of my mother or stealing focus from my sister. Tonight, I am taking the center aisle. I step forward and the sea of silent, stunned elite guests instantly parts for me. The wealthy socialites, the corporate titans, the powerful judges, they all scramble backward, pulling their chairs out of my path. They look at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing that the quiet public school teacher they have spent the entire night ignoring is the actual architect of their impending doom. The only sound in the cavernous St. Regis ballroom is the sharp, steady click of my heels striking the marble. It is a slow, rhythmic march of absolute finality. I reach the front of the room where the shattered remains of the Vanguard dynasty are scattered across the floor. Reginald and Jacqueline are still on their knees, their faces streaked with tears and smeared makeup. They look up at me, and for a fleeting second I can actually see the sheer delusion working behind their panicked eyes. They are still actively gaslighting themselves. In their desperate, shattered minds, I am still just Maya, the disappointing middle child, the compliant scapegoat who always quietly absorbs their abuse to keep the peace. Jacqueline reaches out a trembling diamond-covered hand toward me. "Maya," she whispers, her voice shaking with a pathetic manufactured relief. "Oh, thank God. Maya, talk to him. You have to talk to Marcus. You are his wife. He will listen to you. Tell him he has to save your father. Tell him we are family. We can fix this. You have to help us beg." They actually believe I am walking up there to save them. They actually believe I am going to throw myself at Marcus's feet and plead for the survival of the very people who have spent 30 years trying to destroy me. Before I can even process the sheer audacity of my mother's delusion, a sharp, hysterical screech tears through the room. "Sit down, Maya," Chloe screams, her voice cracking into a jagged, guttural sob. I pause, looking down at my beautiful, perfect sister. Chloe is still sprawled on the marble floor, surrounded by the shattered glass of our mother's champagne flute. Her designer gown is twisted around her legs, her custom Cartier diamonds glowing mockingly against her skin. She points a shaking, manicured finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure feral hatred. "Sit down right now!" Chloe shrieks frantically, trying to reassert the golden child dominance that died 10 minutes ago. "Stop embarrassing us. You do not belong up there. You do not know anything about business. You are just a pathetic teacher. Get back to your table and let the adults handle this. You are ruining my night. You are ruining everything." I look at Chloe. I do not glare. I do not scowl. I look at her with the cold, clinical detachment of someone inspecting a stain on the sidewalk. I do not say a single word to her. She is no longer worth my breath. I turn my back on my screaming sister and my kneeling parents. I climb the short flight of wooden stairs, stepping onto the main stage. Marcus turns to me, his dark eyes shining with profound pride and absolute adoration. He does not just step aside, he respectfully hands me the heavy leather-bound folio containing the complete forensic financial audit of my father's ruined empire. He bows his head slightly, yielding the floor entirely to me. I step up to the microphone. I grip the cool metal of the stand, adjusting it to my height with slow, deliberate precision. I look out over the crowd of 100 elite guests. I see the Vanguard Logistics Board members sweating in their tailored suits. I see the country club wives clutching their pearls. And directly below me, I see my father staring up at me, his jaw hanging open as the final devastating puzzle pieces finally begin to snap into place in his mind. I do not yell. I do not raise my voice. I speak with the chilling absolute authority of someone holding the executioner's axe. "My husband is entirely correct," I say, my voice resonating smoothly through the massive speakers echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Apex Partners is merely the funding vehicle for this particular acquisition. The capital behind the buyout is vast, but it is heavily restricted. It has been earmarked for a very specific aggressive pivot in corporate strategy. Vanguard Logistics as a shipping entity is functionally dead. A murmur of sheer panic ripples through the front row of corporate board members. Reginald grips the edge of the stage, his knuckles turning stark white. The physical assets, however, the coastal warehouses, the distribution centers, the corporate headquarters, those hold immense value. I continue my gaze sweeping across the terrified executives. They are going to be completely repurposed. The warehouses will be converted into massive regional distribution centers for educational supplies. The corporate headquarters will be gutted and transformed into the largest privately funded charter school and educational training facility in the state. Jacqueline stares up at me, her face completely devoid of color. "Education?" she whispers, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Mother, education," I reply, looking down at her with zero pity. "The division, Marcus mentioned the one absorbing your entire real estate portfolio, is a newly minted non-profit educational trust. And as the founder and sole managing director of that trust, I am the one making the acquisition decisions." Reginald lets out a strangled, gasping sound. He finally understands. He understands that I am not up here to save him. I am the one holding the match to his empire. "You spent my entire life telling me that my chosen profession was a joke," I say, looking directly into my father's horrified eyes. "You told everyone in this room that teaching was not a real career. You said it was a charity job for people who lacked the ruthless ambition to survive in the real world. You mocked my modest salary. You dismissed my passion. You told me I was useless because I did not generate capital." I lean forward slightly, bringing my lips closer to the microphone. "You said I was just a supporter," I say, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that fills every corner of the dead silent ballroom. "You were right. I support futures, just not yours." The imaginary camera drops low to the floor, pointing sharply upward to capture my silhouette against the glaring white light of the projected financial ledgers. I stand tall on the stage, directly beside Marcus. The lens begins a smooth, continuous creeping push inward. From this low angle, I no longer look like the quiet, submissive daughter standing in the shadows of a corporate dynasty. I look towering. I look incredibly powerful. I look monumental. I step up to the microphone. I grip the cool metal of the stand and adjust it to my height with slow, deliberate precision. I do not look at my parents groveling in the dirt. I look out over the crowd. I scan the parted sea of silent, stunned elite guests. The prominent judges, the banking executives, the high society wives clutching their diamond necklaces. They are all staring up at me, completely paralyzed. Jacqueline and Reginald remain on their knees, their faces twisted in absolute bewilderment. They are still desperately gaslighting themselves. I can see the frantic gears turning in their panicked minds, trying to rationalize my presence on this stage. They actually believe I am just the naive public school teacher stepping up to the microphone to beg Marcus on their behalf. They think I am here to save them. Chloe lifts her head from the marble floor. Her tear-streaked face contorts into a mask of pure, feral hatred. "Sit down, Maya," she screams, her voice cracking into a jagged, guttural sob. "Stop embarrassing us. You do not belong up there. You are just a pathetic teacher. Get back to your table and let the adults handle this. You are ruining everything." I do not blink. I do not scowl. I look down at my sister with the cold, clinical detachment of someone inspecting a stain on the sidewalk. I do not say a single word to her. She is no longer worth my breath. I turn my gaze back to the crowd. I do not yell. I do not raise my voice. I speak with the chilling absolute authority of someone holding the executioner's axe. For 7 years, I attended these ridiculous galas. I say, my voice resonating smoothly through the massive St. Regis speakers echoing off the vaulted ceilings. For 7 years, I stood in the corners while you sipped expensive champagne and paraded your generational wealth. I listened to you whisper behind your hands. I heard the pitying laughs. Maya, the disappointment. Maya, the family failure who threw away a corporate dynasty to work in underfunded public schools. You treated my profession like a bizarre charity case, a naive hobby for a woman who lacked the ruthless edge required to survive in your pristine, cutthroat world. A heavy, suffocating silence blankets the ballroom. Several of the Vanguard Logistics board members shift uncomfortably, looking down at their expensive leather shoes. You wrote checks for tens of thousands of dollars to elite private academies just to secure your names on bronze plaques. I continue my gaze slicing through the front row of executives. But you looked at me with absolute disdain when I talked about children who came to my classroom hungry. You sat in your manicured country clubs, discussing offshore tax havens and luxury acquisitions while my students shared broken pencils and outdated textbooks. You mocked my modest salary. You dismissed my passion. You told me I was useless because I did not generate capital. I shift my attention directly to my parents. Jacqueline and Reginald are staring up at me, the delusion finally beginning to shatter behind their wide, bloodshot eyes. 5 years ago I came to your house, Jacqueline, I say, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that fills every corner of the room. I sat at your custom marble dining table. I did not ask for a trust fund. I did not ask for a down payment on a house. I asked for exactly $1,200 to buy winter coats and basic school supplies for my 3rd grade class because the district funding had been completely slashed. Jacqueline shrinks back, her hand flying to her throat. You did not even look up from your tablet, I state, letting the cold hard facts strike them like physical blows. You took a sip of your imported wine and told me I was wasting my life. You told me those children were lost causes. You said investing in them was throwing good money into a black hole. Reginald chimed in from his leather armchair, agreeing with you. He told me to stop playing savior and get a real job that generated actual capital. $1,200. You spent more than that on the floral arrangements for this single evening. You refused to give me a single dime for freezing children because they offered no return on investment. Reginald lets out a strangled, gasping sound. His hands drop from the edge of the stage. He finally understands. He understands that I am not up here to advocate for his salvation. I am the one holding the match to his empire. You thought my world was small, I say, looking back out over the terrified crowd. You thought because I did not care about stock options or corporate buyouts that I was weak. But working in those neighborhoods, working with those kids, gave me something none of you possess. It gave me absolute clarity. It showed me exactly what happens when people like you hoard wealth and strip resources from the people who actually build this city. The Vanguard Logistics executives exchange panicked, horrified glances. They are finally realizing the magnitude of the trap they have walked into. You thought I was just sitting quietly in the background accepting your abuse. I say, my voice ringing with undeniable power. But I was watching. I was learning exactly how your money moved. I was learning exactly where the vulnerabilities were. Marcus did not just find a random commercial real estate buyer. We spent the last 5 years planning this. Every piece of property Vanguard Logistics is forced to liquidate tonight will go directly into the educational trust I control. We are taking the very empire you built on exploitation and using it to fund the lost causes you refuse to help. I pause, letting the devastating weight of my words hang in the heavy dead air of the ballroom. I look directly down at my father, watching his entire life's work vanish into thin air. But I did not just teach those kids. I watched how the system failed them. So I built a new system. The imaginary camera executes a slow, agonizing pan across the front rows of the ballroom. It captures the pristine faces of the elite guests. The prominent federal judges who usually golfed with my father now look physically ill. The chief surgeons, banking executives, and real estate tycoons exchange rapid, terrified glances. The reality is finally penetrating their arrogant, isolated bubbles. They are looking at a woman they have spent their entire lives ignoring and realizing she holds the absolute power to utterly ruin them. The lens snaps violently back to me, standing tall and unyielding at the microphone, bathed in the harsh white light of the financial projectors. You spent years laughing at my tiny apartment, Jacqueline, I say, letting my voice wash over her kneeling, trembling form. You told your country club friends I was wasting away grading spelling tests in a shoebox. You thought I was poor. You thought I was struggling. But I was not just grading papers. I was coding. For 5 years while you attended luncheons and bought purebred show dogs, I was writing algorithms. I was building a proprietary adaptive learning model designed specifically to bypass the bureaucratic failures of the public school system. I was creating an AI-driven educational platform tailored exclusively for marginalized and underfunded school districts. I called it EduNova. Reginald's face twitches violently. His deeply ingrained business instincts are trying desperately to override his blind panic, but he is failing. You thought Marcus was just a glorified IT guy? I continue, my voice slicing through the heavy, dead silence of the room. You completely failed to realize that his role at Apex Partners gave him direct access to their venture capital division. Marcus did not just introduce me to a commercial buyer, he introduced me to my seed investors. Apex Partners reviewed the EduNova beta, and they immediately realized what you were always too arrogant to see. They saw a fundamentally disruptive technology. They saw the future. They injected $20 million in Series A funding into my company 3 years ago. A collective shudder rips through the Vanguard Logistics board members. They know exactly what those numbers mean in the tech world. The men who had previously dismissed me as a simpleton are now staring at me with naked reverence and fear. But the real victory happened last month, I state, allowing a cold, razor-sharp smile to finally touch my lips. While Preston was busy actively draining the retirement accounts of your loyal warehouse workers to pay for Chloe's custom diamond necklaces, I was sitting in a secured boardroom in Washington, D.C. The United States Department of Education conducted a rigorous 2-year pilot program using my software across 50 failing school districts. The results were unprecedented. Test scores skyrocketed, dropout rates plummeted. The federal government signed an exclusive 10-year contract to integrate the EduNova platform into national education standards. I lean forward slightly, making sure my father is looking directly into my eyes so he can witness the exact moment his legacy is eclipsed. The federal contract is worth $500 million, Reginald. I say the words ringing like a death knell through the silent ballroom. I am not a pathetic public school teacher. I am the founder and sole majority shareholder of a $500 million edtech empire. I generate massive amounts of capital. I just do it without exploiting the working class to line my own pockets. Jacqueline literally slumps backwards, sitting heavily on her heels, with her mouth hanging wide open. The words $500 million seem to completely short-circuit her entire nervous system. The immense, staggering wealth she has spent her entire life worshipping and chasing is now concentrated entirely in the hands of the daughter she threw away. She looks at me as if I am a terrifying alien creature she has never seen before. Chloe lets out a bizarre, pathetic whimpering sound from the floor. Her manicured hands gripping her hair so tightly her knuckles turn white. Her entire identity, her carefully constructed status as the golden child, the wealthy, untouchable heiress, is completely vaporized. She is nothing compared to the sister she relentlessly bullied. She is just a disgraced criminal's wife crying in the dirt, while the sister she hated stands on a mountain of legitimate self-made power. Reginald's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated panic. The color drains completely from his face, leaving him looking like a fragile, terrified old man. His chest heaves as his breath comes in short, shallow gasps. The monumental shift in power finally crushes the very last remnants of his towering ego. He realizes with absolute terrifying certainty that the person he is begging for salvation, the person who holds the fate of his freedom and his company in her hands, is the exact same person he has spent 30 years treating like garbage. He is completely, entirely at my mercy. There is no one else to call. There is no one else to bribe. I reach inside the inner breast pocket of Marcus's perfectly tailored suit jacket. I slowly pull out a thick stack of legal documents bound in heavy blue corporate cardstock. I step out from behind the podium, standing at the very edge of the stage, looking down at the broken king. I hold up the Vanguard Logistics acquisition contract, gripping the crisp paper tightly for everyone to see. The imaginary camera begins a slow, continuous circular track around my position on the stage. It glides smoothly through the air, capturing every angle of my absolute control and visually representing the inescapable trap that has finally snapped shut around my family. The heavy blue folder in my hand represents the total annihilation of the Vanguard Empire. I look down at my father, whose mouth is opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. He is trying to find words to bargain with, but the sheer magnitude of his defeat has robbed him of his voice. You actually thought I was going to absorb your massive debt and let you keep playing the titan of industry, I ask, my voice ringing with icy, undeniable clarity. You thought I was stepping in to bail out the family legacy so you could retire to your estate in the Hamptons with your pristine reputation fully intact. You truly believed I would use my capital to shield you from the federal consequences of your own arrogant negligence. Reginald swallows hard, his hands trembling violently against his thighs. He cannot even formulate a coherent sentence. His carefully constructed reality has completely fractured, leaving him as nothing more than a terrified old man kneeling in a tailored suit. I am not saving your legacy, Reginald, I state flatly, refusing to grant him even a fraction of a second of false hope. I am liquidating it. The word echoes through the ballroom, striking the board members and corporate executives like physical blows. The camera continues its slow orbit, highlighting the stark, vivid contrast between my calm, commanding posture and the absolute panic radiating from the floor below. The elite socialites, who had spent the evening gossiping about my modest lifestyle, are now watching me systematically dismantle a billionaire with clinical precision. By Monday morning, the Vanguard Logistics name will be legally dissolved. I explain, detailing the execution of his entire empire. Every single vehicle in your international fleet of long-haul trucks, every single shipping container bearing your precious family crest, is being sold off to a rival freight conglomerate at fire sale auction prices. The capital generated from that massive sale will not be going into your pockets. It will be used to immediately replenish the employee pension funds your golden son-in-law brazenly stole from. The truck drivers, the mechanics, and the warehouse workers you treated like disposable garbage will be made entirely whole. They will get their futures back. You will get absolutely nothing. Preston lets out a muffled, pathetic whimper from the floor, where the private security guards are still pressing his face firmly into the polished marble. Chloe remains entirely catatonic, staring blankly at the ruined fabric of her designer dress, completely incapable of processing her transition from high society royalty to the wife of a convicted felon. But the physical real estate, I continue stepping closer to the edge of the stage, looking directly down at the man who gave me nothing but contempt my entire life. The massive coastal warehouses, the prime industrial lots you spent decades ruthlessly acquiring by stepping on the throats of small business owners. Those are mine now. I am seizing every single square foot of your precious physical empire. The board members gasp collectively, finally understanding the true depth of the corporate takeover. We are gutting your shipping centers, I say, my tone merciless. We are physically stripping the Vanguard name off the sides of the buildings. Your warehouses are going to be transformed into national distribution hubs for educational technology. We are packing them with servers and textbooks instead of luxury imports. And your corporate headquarters, that beautiful glass tower you built as a monument to your own ego, is going to be leveled to the ground. In its place, I am building a state-of-the-art, tuition-free charter school for the exact marginalized communities you spent your entire life exploiting. The Vanguard name will be entirely erased from the skyline. The concept of absolute social erasure is the final killing blow for my mother. Jacqueline cannot handle the reality of becoming socially invisible. The total irrevocable loss of her elite status and her country club dominance completely shatters her fragile mind. She lets out a piercing, agonizing wail that sounds like a wounded animal caught in a snare. The sheer volume of her scream forces several guests in the front row to physically step back in horror. Jacqueline scrambles frantically toward the wooden stairs of the stage. Her expensive designer gown rips loudly as she drags her knees across the harsh marble floor, abandoning any remaining shred of her aristocratic dignity. "No!" Jacqueline shrieks, her voice hoarse and desperate, echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot erase us, Maya. We are your parents. We gave you everything. We clothed you. We fed you. We raised you in high society. You cannot take our name away." She reaches the bottom of the wooden stairs, clawing at the banister, trying desperately to pull her shaking body upward. Her perfectly styled hair is plastered to her sweaty face. Her heavy diamond necklace hangs crookedly around her neck, looking like a sparkling shackle. She looks feral and completely unhinged. "You owe me!" Jacqueline cries out, her manicured nails digging deep into the polished wood of the steps. "I gave you life. I brought you into this world. I put up with your constant disappointments. You owe me your entire existence, Maya. You have to give it back to us. Give the company back right now." I do not move a single inch. I do not offer my hand to help her up from the dirt. I simply stand tall beside my husband, bathed in the harsh, glaring light of the projectors, looking down at the woman who spent 30 years making me feel completely worthless. The camera completes its slow orbit, locking firmly on my face as I deliver the final, devastating strike. "I owe you absolutely nothing, Jacqueline." I say, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper that commands the absolute attention of every single person in the room, stopping her dead in her tracks. "I especially owe you nothing after I finally found out exactly what you did with Grandma's trust fund." The lens of the invisible camera pushes in tight on my face, capturing the microscopic shift in my eyes. For a fleeting fraction of a second, a deep, agonizing flash of long-held pain surfaces. It is the lingering trauma of the neglected daughter finally confronting the ultimate unforgivable betrayal. But that pain does not stay. It instantly crystallizes, freezing over into a mask of cold, calculated, absolute vengeance. Jacqueline goes completely rigid. The hysterical wailing dies in her throat, abruptly cut off, as if she has been physically struck. She kneels on the marble stairs, staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. The blood drains completely from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. Reginald physically recoils, dragging himself backward on the floor away from the stage. They know exactly what I'm talking about. "Grandma Eleanor left me a trust fund." I say, my voice slicing through the dead silence of the ballroom with surgical precision. $200,000. It was not a fortune by the standards of this room, but to me, it was everything. She explicitly earmarked those funds for my education and my future business ventures. It was my safety net. It was the only tangible proof I had that someone in this family actually believed in my potential. I stepped to the side of the podium. The heavy blue acquisition contract is still in my left hand, but I reach into the folio with my right hand and pull out a smaller stack of documents. These pages are lined with red banking seals and official federal notary stamps. 5 years ago, I came to your house. I continue looking down at my mother, whose entire body is now shaking violently. I sat in your living room and asked to access my trust to help fund the initial development of Edunova. You sat across from me holding a cup of tea and put on a masterful performance of parental pity. You sighed. You looked at me with fake sympathetic eyes. You told me the market had taken a catastrophic downturn. You blamed aggressive hedge fund managers and volatile tech stocks. You looked me right in the face and told me my grandmother's money was simply gone, lost to a bad economy. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd of elite guests. White-collar corporate maneuvering is one thing, but stealing a family inheritance is a profound social taboo. The wealthy socialites and powerful judges begin whispering among themselves, their faces twisting with disgust, as they look at my parents groveling on the floor. I believed you. I state the coldness in my voice, causing the temperature in the room to plummet. I mourned my grandmother's lost gift. I went back to my tiny apartment, and I worked 3 separate jobs to fund my own platform. I coded until my fingers bled. I lived on instant ramen and sheer willpower because I thought I had absolutely nothing. But I did not lose my money to a market crash, did I, Jacqueline? My mother cannot speak. Her jaw trembles, but no words come out. She is completely trapped in the glaring spotlight of her own criminality. When Apex Partners initiated the forensic financial audit for the Vanguard buyout, they did not just look at the corporate ledgers, I say holding the bank documents up for the entire ballroom to see. They traced every single personal account connected to the Vanguard name. They found the hidden offshore transfers. They found the offshore shell companies. And they found the exact paper trail leading directly to my trust fund. I dropped the bank documents onto the stage right in front of my mother's face. The heavy paper slaps against the wood with a sharp crack. I saw the withdrawal slips, I tell her, my tone completely devoid of mercy. I saw the transfer authorizations. I saw my own signature perfectly flawlessly replicated by your hand. You forged my name, Jacqueline. You and Reginald committed outright felony fraud. You liquidated my entire future in one single afternoon without a second thought. You stole from your own daughter. The whispers in the crowd escalate into a low roar of outrage. The judges in the front row are staring at my parents with absolute professional contempt. They know the legal implications of what I am saying. Wire fraud, forgery, grand larceny. My parents are not just facing bankruptcy. They are facing federal prison sentences. And the most pathetic part of this entire crime, I continue raising my voice slightly to cut through the noise of the disgusted crowd, is where that money actually went. It did not go to save Vanguard Logistics. It did not go to pay off your mounting corporate debts or secure the pensions of your employees. It went to a florist in Paris. It went to a bespoke bridal designer in Milan. It went to hand-carved ice sculptures and imported white truffles in a 10-piece string quartet. I turn my gaze slowly away from my parents and lock my eyes directly onto my sister. Chloe is kneeling on the marble floor next to her ruined husband. As my words register, the sheer magnitude of her humiliation finally hits her. The beautiful fairy tale wedding she has spent the last 5 years bragging about, the ultimate high society event that cemented her status as the golden child, was entirely funded by felony theft. Chloe physically shrinks back into the shadows of the stage. She tries to hide her face behind her trembling hands, but there is nowhere to hide. The hundreds of guests are staring at her. The diamond necklace around her throat suddenly looks like stolen goods. The designer dress she is wearing looks like a criminal costume. She looks absolutely pathetic. Preston is sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit, realizing that he is now legally tied to a family of literal thieves. "You financed your dream life with my money," I say, looking directly at Chloe and Preston, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying finality. "So it is only fair I take it back." The imaginary camera tilts slightly off-axis, executing a jarring Dutch angle that mimics the psychological vertigo and total collapse of Chloe's pristine world. The geometric lines of the ballroom warp in the frame as I slide the bank forgery documents back into my leather folio. I do not give Chloe time to recover from the revelation of her stolen wedding. I do not let Preston find his breath. The dominoes are falling in rapid succession, and I am driving the final stake into their manufactured paradise. I reach down into the folio once more, pulling out a thick, crisp white document stamped with a bright red corporate seal and a certified sheriff's department emblem. I step closer to the very edge of the stage, looking down into the dim shadows where my sister is shaking violently. "You thought your personal assets were protected, Chloe," I say, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp clinical register that cuts clean through the rising murmurs of the elite crowd. "You thought your private life was separate from the criminal disaster unfolding at Vanguard Logistics. When your perfect husband was frantically scrambling to cover the massive multi-million-dollar deficit from his embezzlement, he did not just steal from the warehouse employee pension funds. He went to private predatory lenders. He went to high-interest secondary financing firms desperate to secure short-term cash to keep the federal regulators off his back before this gala." Preston shifts his weight, his eyes darting frantically toward the ballroom exits like a trapped animal calculating an escape route. The security guards grip his shoulders harder, forcing him to stay exactly where he is. He needed massive leverage to secure those secondary loans under the table. I continue my gaze locking onto my sister's pale, sweat-slicked face. "And since your father had already maxed out the corporate lines of credit, Preston had only one asset left of any significant value: your home. He put up your $7 million custom estate in the hills, the house my grandmother's forged money helped furnish, as the absolute primary collateral for his private debt." Chloe looks up, her breath catching in her throat in a ragged gasp. What she whispers, her lips trembling. "No, no, he would not do that." "He did exactly that," I reply, tapping the front page of the legal packet. "He signed the corporate cross-collateralization waivers 3 months ago. The complete forensic financial data compiled under the audit folders named Duyen Mao 1_21.docx and Duyen Mao 2_22.docx prove that he defaulted on the very first interest payment 4 weeks ago. The lending institution had the legal right to foreclose immediately, but they chose to hold off. They held off because my secondary holding company, Apex Development, stepped in this morning at precisely 8 a.m. and purchased the entire debt portfolio in cash. I bought your mortgage, Chloe. I own the dirt under your feet." I snap the blue corporate binding open, letting the papers rustle directly over the microphone. "This is a formal 30-day emergency eviction notice." I announce, my voice echoing with terrifying weight through the vaulted ceilings of the St. Regis Ballroom. "The locks on your mansion are being changed at midnight. The private moving crews are already stationed at your security gates, waiting for my signal. Every piece of designer furniture, every custom chandelier, every single garment in your massive walk-in closet is being packed into cardboard boxes and placed on the curb. You do not have a home anymore. You are being completely liquidated." The psychological impact of the eviction notice instantly breaks whatever remaining sanity held Chloe and Preston together. The pristine facade of the perfect country club power couple vanishes, completely replaced by pure feral survival instincts. Preston turns on Chloe, his face contorting into a mask of absolute rage and venom. "You bitch!" he screams, his voice cracking into a jagged, guttural shout as he tries to break away from the guards. "This is your fault. This is all your fault. You are the one who demanded the villa in Aspen. You are the one who insisted we needed a second yacht just to compete with the country club board members. I told you we were running low on liquid capital, but you wouldn't listen. You told me to fix it. You told me a real executive always finds a way. I did this for you. I ruined my life to buy your pathetic trophies." Chloe recoils as if she has been physically struck, her manicured fingers clawing at the marble floor as she screams back at him, her perfect golden child composure entirely shattered. "Shut up, Preston. Don't you dare blame me for your pathetic incompetence. You are the one who blew millions on tech options that tanked in 48 hours. You are the thief. You are the one going to federal prison. I never told you to forge signatures or steal employee pensions. You ruined my life. You ruined my family name. You are a disgusting parasite. The entire country club elite stands in shocked, paralyzed silence, watching the golden children tear each other apart like wild animals in front of the entire city. The corporate board members scramble backward, pulling their chairs out of the splash zone of my family's spectacular public self-destruction. The data fields detailed in the supplementary audit files. Duyen Mao 3_22.docx and Duyen Mao 4_22.docx flash brightly on the projection screens behind me, mapping out every single fraudulent invoice Preston signed to pay for Chloe's luxury credit card bills. I look down at them from the stage. I do not glare. I do not gloat. I feel absolutely nothing but a deep clinical detachment. They financed their luxury paradise by exploiting warehouse workers and stealing my grandmother's legacy. Now they are drowning in the consequences of their own unchecked greed. Reginald Vanguard watches his children scream at each other, his jaw hanging open as his entire dynasty collapses into a heap of criminal liabilities right beneath his feet. The sheer terror of losing his freedom, his status, and his wealth drives him to one final, pathetic act of desperation. He grips the edge of the wooden stage, his knuckles turning stark white as he forces himself to his feet, staring up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "This is extortion, Maya," he bellows, his voice shaking with a manufactured authority that sounds completely empty in the cavernous room. "You think you have won because you hid behind Marcus and a tech startup. But you have crossed a legal line. You forged these audit metrics. You illegally acquired confidential banking records to trap my executives. I built this city. I know every federal prosecutor in this district. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years. I will sue you for corporate espionage. I will sue you for defamation. I will strip you of every single dime you made from that pathetic app. I will destroy you." I look down at my father. I do not flinch at his threats. I do not step back from the edge of the stage. I just laugh. It is a low, steady, genuine laugh that resonates clearly through the microphone, cutting clean through his frantic, desperate screaming. It is the sound of absolute freedom. It is the laugh of a woman who knows her enemy has absolutely no cards left to play. My laugh rings out through the vaulted ceiling, cold, detached, and utterly unbothered by Reginald's desperate bluster. I look down at him from the edge of the stage, my expression completely unreadable as his face transitions from furious crimson to a sickly, panicked white. "You truly live in a vanished era, Reginald," I say, my voice carrying cleanly over the microphone, silencing his frantic threats. "You honestly believe your country club connections and golf course handshakes have any weight against a federal accounting audit, corporate espionage, defamation? Go ahead and call your lawyers. You can use whatever liquid capital you have left, which according to our latest balance sheets is less than $10,000. Reginald freezes his mouth, opening slightly as the reality of his financial paralysis sets in. Before I walked onto this stage tonight, my legal team forwarded the complete audited embezzlement files, the offshore wire transfers, and the forged trust documents directly to the field office of the FBI. I state flatly, watching the absolute destruction of his pride. By tomorrow morning, a federal asset freeze will be placed on every single personal and corporate account bearing your name. You and Jacqueline will not be tying me up in litigation for 10 years. You will be spending those years trying to keep your golden son-in-law from trading his tailored suits for a federal jumpsuit. Jacqueline lets out another desperate, gasping sob, her hands slipping from the polished wood of the stairs, as she realizes the total irrevocable end of her social existence. "We are not just taking the warehouses, Reginald. I continue refusing to grant them a single shred of dignity. We have already informed the board of directors of this country club about the impending federal investigation. Your membership is being formally revoked at midnight. The country club elite do not associate with white-collar felons who steal from their own children to pay for flower arrangements. You will be left with absolutely nothing but your basic social security checks. The Vanguard name is dead." "No. Maya, please," Jacqueline shrieks, crawling entirely to her knees at the bottom of the steps, her crooked diamond necklace scraping loudly against the marble. "You cannot do this. Think of the bloodline. We are your family. We are the same blood. You cannot leave your own flesh and blood on the street. I step down from the wooden stage, my movements fluid and precise. Marcus steps into place beside me, his steady grounding presence, a stark contrast to the absolute wreckage on the floor. I link my arm through his, standing tall, as I look down at the woman who spent 30 years making me invisible. Family protects you, Jacqueline. I say, my tone dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper that commands the absolute attention of every single person remaining in the ballroom. Family builds you up. They don't forge your signature, steal your inheritance, and try to erase your existence just to fund an aesthetic for the golden child. We share DNA, Jacqueline, nothing more. I turn my back on them completely. The reversing tracking shot moves backward smoothly, keeping Marcus and me perfectly in the center of the frame as we walk away from the podium. Behind us, the chaos erupts into full public collapse. Preston is screaming at Chloe, his voice bouncing violently off the crystal chandeliers as he blames her for his embezzlement while Chloe claws at his face in a feral panic. Jacqueline is wailing on the stairs, and Reginald stands paralyzed, a broken old man, watching his empire systematically dissolve into ash. As we pass the edge of the stage, I stop for a brief second next to where the private security guards are still pressing Preston firmly into the polished marble. I look down at his expensive sweat-stained tuxedo. With a clinical precision, I reach into my folio, pull out the original $800 catering bill from my studio apartment, and drop it directly onto his chest. Consider that a receipt for your dream life, Preston, I say quietly. We continue walking, our footsteps echoing with quiet authority as we exit through the massive double doors of the ballroom, leaving the screaming, the crying, and the total annihilation of the Vanguard Empire behind us. The lens shifts smoothly, the grand, high-contrast lighting of the St. Regis Ballroom fading away as the camera transitions seamlessly back to the warm, soft atmosphere of the present-day living room. The heavy blue folder rests quietly on the mahogany coffee table. I take a slow, deep breath, sitting back into the comfortable sofa next to Marcus, the absolute peace of total vindication finally settling over my shoulders. The long-held pain of the forgotten daughter is gone, replaced entirely by the quiet reality of a new life built completely on my own terms. The glass walls of our new corporate headquarters reflect the golden hour sun setting over the city. I stand by the window, the soft hum of an automated espresso machine running in the executive kitchen behind me. Marcus walks into the frame, handing me a crystal glass of water before resting his hand flat against my lower back. The constant suffocating tension that defined the first 30 years of my life has completely vanished. The forensic legal binders, specifically the ones filed under Duyen Mao 3_25.docx and Duyen Mao 4_25.docx, are locked away in the company vault downstairs, no longer needed as weapons because the battle is completely over. The aftermath of that single evening at the country club gala unfolded with an unforgiving, devastating momentum. Preston did not even make it to trial. Faced with the mountain of forensic financial tracking data I provided to the federal prosecutors, he accepted a plea deal for grand larceny, wire fraud, and pension embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. He entered the facility 2 months ago, stripped of his luxury watches, his tailored suits, and his pristine white savior reputation. Chloe's fallout was an exercise in absolute social erasure. Left with the multi-million-dollar debts her husband accumulated, she filed for Chapter 7, bankruptcy within weeks of the eviction. The country club elite, the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority alumni, and the high society philanthropists who once courted her favor dropped her instantly. She became a radioactive liability to their carefully managed public images. Today, my sister works as a front desk receptionist at a mid-tier medical clinic across town, answering phones and sorting insurance files for $45,000 a year. Her pristine designer wardrobe has been replaced by off-the-rack scrubs, and she spends her evenings in a cramped studio apartment, completely shunned by the world she sacrificed her integrity to impress. Reginald and Jacqueline's fall was the final structural collapse of the Vanguard legacy. The federal asset freeze stripped them of the Hamptons estate, the luxury vehicles, and every single offshore account they had used to fund their superficial dominance. My holding company officially dissolved the Vanguard Logistics name, physically painting over the corporate logo on every shipping container and warehouse wall across the coast. My parents now live in a small 600-square-foot one-bedroom apartment in an older residential district. Their precious black excellence facade is permanently destroyed. They subsist entirely on their monthly Social Security checks, forced to look at the glass towers of the city skyline, knowing their family name has been completely expunged from the Titan class. They chose an aesthetic over their own blood, and the universe returned them to the exact financial obscurity they spent their entire lives running from. Meanwhile, EduNova has entered its international growth phase. The transition of the former Vanguard fulfillment centers into tech distribution hubs allowed us to double our operational capacity ahead of schedule. We currently provide tuition-free educational access and server infrastructure to over 50,000 students in marginalized school districts across the country. The state-of-the-art charter school we built on the site of the old corporate headquarters opens its doors next month, completely funded by the revenue generated from the Vanguard liquidation. Marcus and I are not just shifting paper wealth around to create an illusion of success. We are building a tangible generational legacy anchored in real cultural impact and systemic change. I turn my body slowly away from the window, stepping toward the center of the office. The camera slows down, executing a gentle, continuous slide from left to right as the warm lighting wraps around me. I look directly into the camera lens, my posture relaxed, my shoulders dropped, exuding the ultimate peace and triumph of a woman who has claimed her own destiny. For 30 years, I lived as the scapegoat of a family system that valued appearance over authenticity. I say my voice steady, resonant, and entirely unbothered. I carried the guilt of their disappointment because I didn't fit their narrow definition of success. I stayed small so their egos could stay large. I watched them steal my inheritance, forge my name, and minimize my potential to fund the golden child's illusion. But the most important lesson I learned through this entire journey is that your self-worth is never conditional on your family's capacity to see it. I step closer to the camera, the framing tightening into a classic corporate profile. You do not owe your life, your talent, or your silence to people who require your self-eraser to keep their harmony intact. I continue delivering the final empowering message directly to the audience. When toxic relatives treat your identity as a liability, you do not have to beg for a seat at their table. You build your own table. You do not have to scream. You do not have to throw fits. And you do not have to seek active, destructive vengeance. The absolute best revenge is unbothered, massive, undeniable success. It is becoming so secure, so financially independent, and so deeply fulfilled that their opinions simply lose the power to reach you. Marcus steps into the frame beside me, his arm catching mine as we look out toward the city below. The camera executes one final slow, deliberate push-in on my smiling face, capturing the absolute certainty of a woman who stopped running from her past and started dictating her own future. The warm light fades out perfectly, and the screen drops into complete absolute black.